This video is sponsored by italki. I'll talk a little bit more about them later on in this video. Isn't it interesting how differently you behave around different people? You obviously don't speak the same way to your grandparents as you do to your neighbors or your little cousin. What is that exactly? Is it a different facet of your personality coming out? Why don't we just speak the same way to everyone? Living in another country is exactly like that. The way you talk changes because who you're talking to changes. This is why I say it's so important to learn the language of the people that you're spending time with. One of the most powerful things that I've come to realize, that I've come to learn after living in different parts of the world, is that there is no single right way to do things. That's the beauty of humanity. We don't all agree and we don't have to. And there's a deeper truth to that, I think, that made me question how I used to see the world, which was much more rooted in right and wrong. It's really fun to make these comparisons across cultures and see what we can learn from each culture. Here's one way that I would define culture: the answer a particular group of people has on how to live. Culture is just the result of us making sense of the world, and I find it just amazing that different societies have different answers to the same problems. That's what this video is about, me comparing those different answers. And it's pretty hilarious how two societies can have literally opposite answers to the same thing, and it's fine. I've observed this in myself. It feels like I go through a personality change every time I move to a new country. I feel like the place itself changes you. And so in this video, I'm going to compare 4 different places I've spent a considerable chunk of my life in. The United States, where I've spent roughly 18 years of my life. France, where I'm currently based and have spent 3 years of my life. Mexico, where I am right now, where I've spent about 9 months. And I'm gonna kind of put together Argentina and Italy, which I see as sister countries, where I've spent a combined 8 or 9 months. This mainly focuses on countries in the West. In the future, I cannot wait to expand outside of that and see what life is like in other parts of the world as well. Finally, there are a lot of generalizations in this video, and so obviously there are exceptions to everything that I say here. Either way, I'm just sharing my opinions based off of my experiences. This is fun. Without further ado, time. Living in a foreign culture is a very delicate balance between doing things the way you've been taught growing up and adapting to the way things are done in the place that you find yourself. For example, it's a sin to be late in the United States. People get angry about it, okay? And it's borderline a sin to be on time in Latin America. If this is a continuum, Italy is closer to Argentina and Mexico, and France is a little bit closer to the United States. It's kind of like the farther north you go, the more people are punctual. I can't tell you how many times I've felt like an idiot arriving to something on time here in Mexico or in Argentina, and nobody else is there. I thought I was getting pranked. I wasn't. I was just an hour and a half early. In that way, I find myself being a lot more laid back and relaxed in Latin America. And I'm stressing way more about the time in non-Latin countries. I generally build habits based around the culture of the places that I spend time in, and to be honest with you, I think Mexico and Argentina have ruined my ability to be on time. Italians are pretty understanding, the French a little bit less so, and people in the US think I'm a little shit. There's another cool consequence to this different relationship with time. I've talked about it a lot in the past, but it's interesting to note that people here, I'm in Mexico right now, seem to live more day to day. Whereas my friends from Europe, or in particular the United States, often live kind of in the future. Most of my conversations with them are about the future, about things that are going to happen, how problems are solved. Okay, so this is a really interesting one. If the customer service and bureaucracy are anything to base anything off of, the go-to answer to any question in France is no. That's the starting point. No matter what, no matter who you are, no matter what the situation, no. And then you go from there. In Mexico, it's the opposite. It always starts with yes. And in that sense, I've noticed a bit of a continental divide between Latin America and Europe. This may seem like a critique of France and an endorsement of Mexico, but it's nowhere near that simple. I'll give you a really clear example. I can't tell you how many times I've been somewhere in Mexico where I need some help, let's say a supermarket. And what do you do in that sort of situation? You ask for help. Perdón, ¿dónde queda tal cosa? And you will always get a response, even if they have no idea what the answer is. It goes without saying, but this is not helpful. I can't tell you how many times I've been sent to the wrong aisle in the supermarket. I'm looking for bread and I end up with diapers because Mexicans don't know how to say no. It's a courtesy thing. You know, they want to be polite, but for a while it was throwing me off. I had the same problem over a decade ago in Panama. I went on a trip there with my family and we were lost. And And this was before the days of Google Maps, if you can harken back to those days. So my dad kept pulling over and asking for directions. And after the third time of getting sent the wrong way, I mean, we did not end up where we wanted to go, we just stopped asking. Again, I don't think the people were doing this maliciously. It's just how they handle this sort of situation. Now, here's a really interesting thing. When you're kind of faced with that sort of scenario, it has an impact on how you interact with the world. And this kind of environment makes me skeptical. I'm a more skeptical person in Latin America. I don't take anything at face value. And this is a truth that is applicable to many things in Latin America. Do not believe it when Mexicans tell you it's not spicy. It is. And to be honest with you, the same is true with like the cops, for example, okay? I was being driven by a Mexican and he ran a red light with a cop just 50 feet away. And I look over in panic thinking, oh my God, we're gonna get pulled over. And the cop just sat there scrolling on his phone, finishing his donut. In France, on the other hand, it's all about conviction. It's like, do you really want it? Do you really want to open a bank account? Do you really want a bank account? Really? Bonjour, monsieur. J'aimerais bien ouvrir un compte et vous donner tout mon argent dès demain, si c'est possible. Hors de question, monsieur. On est désolé, mais ça va être carrément impossible. Merci beaucoup. Au revoir. Like I said before, the answer is automatically no, and you're going to have to be persistent and dig your heels in if you want to get anywhere, even with the most basic things. To be honest with you, it's not an improvement, it's just as misleading, just in the other direction. I don't know what it is. I feel like France is the hot girl playing hard to get. And although it's incredibly frustrating, I mean, gosh, I do sometimes wish things were simpler, it has made me a grittier person. It has taught me the skill of fighting for the things that I really want. Now, there's a second layer to all this, which is the attitude to possibilities. As many of you know, I'm quite critical of the United States, but this is one area where the US really excels, in my opinion. It's that sort of can-do attitude. Anything's possible. I really like this, and I do my very best to embody this. I've just found that people in the US are very supportive of entrepreneurial ideas, whether they're realistic or not, much more than anywhere else in the world, that I've been at least. Doesn't matter, again, if it's unrealistic or disruptive, people are like, go for it. And Europeans don't seem to understand how I can be so optimistic about the future or from where I get the willpower to go for these unrealistic ideas. Now, before I go any further, you'll notice that all of my observations are based off of this kind of push-pull dynamic. Either culture rubs off on you and changes you in that way, or the opposite, you're fighting against it reactionarily. That is, once again, that very delicate balance of doing things the way you know how to do them and adapting to this new way of how to do things. Before I go any further, I want to talk briefly about the sponsor of today's video, which is italki, which I'm very pleased about. It is one of my favorite tools in my arsenal of learning languages. Italki is actually a resource that I cite in my language learning course as an incredible way to sort of take things to the next step. Now, the topic of this entire video is about how environment and different cultures can have an impact on your personality. But I think that there's something that's even bigger than that. There's a way to sort of get even more out of every one of those experiences. And that is learning the language of the people. There's just no way around it. And it's something that I've championed on this channel repeatedly. In order to have the full experience, you have to learn the language. Even just a few words and expressions can have an enormous impact. Now, one of the biggest challenges that anyone faces when learning a foreign language is getting proper feedback on things like how to speak correctly, sentence structure, vocabulary, using expressions like a native, etc. Because you can read how the rules of a language work in a grammar book, but that's not how language works in real life. And so the best way to overcome this is by talking with a native. But that actually can be very difficult if you don't know any native speakers of the target language that you're trying to learn. italki solves this problem entirely. You know, it's a platform that allows you to connect with native speakers around the world on your schedule. And what I love about it too is that you're paying somebody to be patient with you, to work with you in a way that you can't ask friends and family to do. It's difficult because when you're learning a language, especially in the beginning, you're very slow, you're looking for your words, you're making tons of mistakes. So my way of feeling less embarrassed and self-conscious is by paying somebody to help me so that I don't feel like I'm a drag. This is something that I did to help me learn Italian and Portuguese. And it's one of those things that you really can't replace any other way, except for going to the country in question. One of my favorite things about italki is that there is no subscription. You just pay per lesson. And so you can go at your pace and do it whenever you feel like it. There are more than 150 languages on the platform and people from over 190 countries that you can connect with. And if you're not in the financial situation to be able to pay for classes online right now, you can actually sign up for free language exchanges within the italki community. So there really is something here for everybody. And if you're interested in checking it out, I will leave a link to it in the description. Thank you again for italki for sponsoring this video. Now let's dive right back in. Communication. So in the United States, I find that people don't speak in a super straightforward, confrontational way. It is seen as disrespectful to offer any sort of critique or feedback that could be interpreted as offensive. I think the general mindset is that it's better to be supportive than to be brutally honest. Other cultures often label this as fake. The French, the Italians, the Argentinians, the Dutch are all far more direct when they don't like something. Now that doesn't mean that they don't have their own bizarre communication styles. In France, there's that invisible rule that you absolutely must start every conversation with bonjour. If you don't, they can't even look you in the eye. That's how disgusted with you they are. Now, if we have the scale here of polite to not polite, Americans are on the very politically correct side, and on the opposite side are the Argentinians. They are the worst. There is zero concept of political correctness in Argentina. Doesn't exist. A really easy example is how they talk to each other. You take the worst quality of one of your friends and you call them by that. Vení acá, gordo. That's literally, hey fatty, come over here. Can you imagine saying that in the United States? No, don't try it. Do not try saying that in the United States. And while this obviously very much depends on context, it's often said with love. Can you believe that? I generally like this much more straightforward approach. I mean, I think this last example with the Argentinians is taking it a little far. I mean, I certainly would not go around calling people gordo, but I do think there's a way to be direct with people without being just straight up mean. And that's something that I picked up considerably while living in Paris. It has certainly required building a thicker skin. When you grow up in the United States, you're coddled. Everybody's offended by everything. But I prefer things this way. You know, it's liberating. It's a lot more to the point. It's just more useful to have honest feedback. And it's a great way to build trust with people, to be honest with you. Ironically, I have to be the most careful with what I say in the country that I was born in. You know, one other observation I have on communication is how we oftentimes lean on different tools based off of the cultures that we come from. Europeans really need their cigarettes. They tell me that it's a social habit, almost as if there was no way to step outside and take a 5-minute break without lighting up, which is something that I personally don't understand because coming from the United States, you're weird if you smoke at this point. I don't have a single friend that does. And so there's a huge gap between North Americans and Europeans in that regard. Openness. Mexicans and Italians are very open. And so it's really easy to connect with them, at least in my case. The French are a lot less open at first, but they're very loyal. And once you've broken through, they stick with you. However, with the French in particular, I mean, this is the case for many different cultures, but with the French in particular, the language barrier is very important. Being able to speak French will utterly change your experience with French people. I can promise you that. And it'll utterly change your experience with all cultures, I think. Europeans often complain, and I happen to agree with this complaint, that you can meet an American, quickly feel like you're best friends with them, and then never hear from them again. And they don't understand that. So interestingly, this kind of thing changes how I sort of psychologically prepare when I go to each of these places. I try to read social cues through the lens of the cultural context that I'm in. If it's taking me a little while to break the ice with a French person, I'm not discouraged necessarily. And when communicating with people of different cultures, I kind of almost try to act like a chameleon. I do my very best to convey the message that I want to convey, but through their vocabulary, through their way of speaking. So I pick my words very carefully when I speak with Americans, and I try to be as direct as possible when I speak with a group of Argentinians. Energy. Energetically, I found Mexicans to be very calm and grounded as a whole. This is a generalization, of course. Kapha energy is what my mom says about Mexicans if you're into Ayurveda. And as a result, I definitely do feel more relaxed here because of that. Now, on the flip side, Italians and Argentinians are so much more aggressive, it's not even funny. They're way in your face, you know, low patience, snapping, hand gestures. My mom says they have pitta energy. Parisians are like that, but I don't think that's a fair representation of the entirety of France. Once again, I find that in aggressive places, I find myself becoming more aggressive. And the reason for that is because if you don't get aggressive, you risk getting squashed. And then on the flip side, in a place that's much more relaxed and grounded. Being aggressive doesn't work. You have to kind of reflect the energy of the people. Mexicans don't exactly love Argentinians, I think partially for this reason. I think there's this aggressive, kind of egotistical stereotype that exists that's not based on nothing. Physicality. One thing that I find really fascinating is how physical dynamics change in each country. Americans are very famous for their hugs, but are in general a lot less touchy than Latin people. I find that I have to be much more mindful of people's personal space in the United States than pretty much anywhere else. Paris, on the other hand, which again is not representative of all of France, but still, in Paris, personal space bubbles are tiny. And I think this is a reflection of how small apartments are in the city and how dense the population is. And another really interesting thing that I found is how I feel with respect to other people. So in France, I'm definitely on the smaller side. Same with the US, I would say. In the Netherlands, I don't think there's another man in the entire country that's as short as me. But here in Mexico, I'm pretty much normal height. I mean, there's plenty of young guys that are my height or shorter here. I don't think it's like a power dynamic thing. I've always had big energy, and I feel like people have seen me for that. And I honestly don't really care. But it's interesting how I feel like I'm looking more at eye level here, whereas in Europe, I'm looking up. How people treat me. Okay, the last major point I'm gonna cover here, which I think is one of the most fascinating, is how people treat me based off of how I look and sound. Being a white male, I obviously cannot speak on any other experience other than my own, although I am definitely aware not everybody has my experience. As far as I'm concerned, racism still very much exists in all countries. I've never been to a country that doesn't still deal with racism. Although, interestingly, I think it manifests itself in different ways based off of different cultures and where each country's at. I'm mentioning this here right now because I don't want to skip over this fact, although I can't really comment extensively on something that I don't personally experience, other than to say that I know it still very much exists. Here's what I'll say. Of all the places I've ever been, Italy is the one that most received me as one of their own. I think this is because I look Italian. I also use my hands and kind of speak like the Italians. I'm opinionated like Italians. And so I just naturally fit in. And I have so much fun talking with Italians. I mean, they're so expressive. It's just a blast. In contrast to that, the country that most treats me like a foreigner is Mexico. To them, I'm a gringo or a güero because, you know, of how I look, also because of how I sound when I speak English. And so as a consequence, you know, this means I'm often getting charged a lot more for the tacos on the street, and they assume that I can't speak their language. That is until I open my mouth. And then all of a sudden, my identity switches. Thanks to the fact that I have Argentinian roots, both my parents come from Argentina, I speak with a strong Argentinian accent. And something really interesting happens. Everything flips. And all of a sudden, I go from being dumb American to egotistical Argentinian. A whole new set of stereotypes and judgments get imposed. It's funny because, yes, the whole enormous ego stereotype is a real thing in Argentina. And it's so funny how in the span of a few seconds, all of these stereotypes about this other country get applied to you, and it affects how people treat you. I like it. It's a nice break from being from the United States. I get to field slightly different questions for a little while. Final thoughts. Okay, wow, that was a lot of analysis. I'm very curious if you agreed with me or if not, and why. Many of you have very interesting cultural observations that I love to read. Look, I think living abroad's amazing. I think everybody that can should do it. I think that it helps make you more empathetic and compassionate for others. It makes the world a little bit of a smaller place. And it opens your eyes to the realization that there are many ways to run a society, many ways to answer different problems that crop up in life. I will leave things at that. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, give it a like and consider subscribing, and I will see you all very soon.